She stood trial alone, facing a room full of hostile eyes and whispered accusations. The young woman's hands trembled as she waited, knowing that everyone in that dusty courthouse had already decided her fate. But then the saloon doors burst open, and a feared gunslinger walked in, looked straight at her, and called her his wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that cramped room turned to stare at the tall stranger with weathered hands and cold blue eyes. This was Caleb Rye, a man whose reputation traveled faster than wildfire across the frontier. He was known for his quick draw and quicker justice, but most of all, he was known for keeping to himself. So when he claimed this accused woman as his own, the entire town held its breath. Let me tell you how we got to this moment, because this story starts weeks before, in the quiet corners of a town that had lost its way. Sarah McKenna had always been different. She lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of town, tending to her garden and keeping to herself. The townspeople whispered about her because she didn't attend church regularly, and because she read books instead of gossiping with the other women. But what really set them against her was her kindness to people they had decided didn't matter. She would leave food for the traveling workers. She would tend to sick animals that others had given up on. She even helped old Martha Jenkins with her laundry when arthritis made it too painful for the elderly woman to manage alone. But in a town where conformity was valued above compassion, Sarah's gentle nature was seen as suspicious. The trouble began when Reverend Thomas arrived with his wife, Constance. They were new to the town, but they quickly gained influence by telling people what they wanted to hear. The Reverend spoke about righteousness and judgment, while his wife organized the women into a tight circle of gossip and suspicion. Together, they turned the community's minor complaints about Sarah into something much darker. They whispered that her garden grew too well, that her healing remedies for sick animals worked too effectively. They suggested that a woman living alone must be hiding something shameful. Slowly, they planted seeds of doubt and fear that grew into something ugly. The situation exploded one evening when young Tommy Peterson went missing. The boy had wandered off during a storm, and search parties combed the countryside looking for him. It was Sarah who found him, unconscious and injured near the creek. She carried him to safety and tended his wounds until the doctor arrived. Tommy survived, but he had hit his head on the rocks and couldn't remember exactly what had happened. In his confused state, he mentioned seeing Sarah near the water. That was all Reverend Thomas and his wife needed. They twisted the boy's innocent words into something sinister, suggesting that Sarah had lured him to the creek with evil intentions. The accusation spread like poison through the town. People who had once accepted Sarah's quiet ways now saw them as proof of guilt. The same healing skills that had saved sick animals were now viewed as dark magic. Her solitary nature was no longer seen as preference, but as evidence of hidden shame. When they finally arrested Sarah, she faced the charges with quiet dignity. She knew that defending herself would only make things worse. The town had already decided she was guilty, and anything she said would be twisted to fit their narrative. So she sat in that courthouse, alone and abandoned, while people she had tried to help called for her punishment. But Sarah wasn't as alone as she thought. Caleb Rye had been watching from the shadows. He had arrived in town weeks earlier, just another drifter looking for work and a place to rest his horse. He had planned to move on quickly, as he always did, but something made him stay. That something was Sarah. He had noticed her first in the general store, where she was buying supplies for old Martha Jenkins. Most people ignored the elderly woman, but Sarah treated her with respect and genuine care. Later, he saw Sarah leaving food for the railroad workers, making sure they had something warm to eat after their long shifts. Caleb recognized something in Sarah that others missed. He saw the loneliness in her eyes because he carried the same burden. He understood her need for solitude because he shared it. But while his isolation came from a reputation built on violence, hers came from a heart too pure for a world that had grown cruel. As the days passed, Caleb found himself lingering in town, making excuses to stay. He would watch Sarah tend her garden in the early morning light. He would see her reading on her porch in the evenings, her face peaceful in the lamplight. He had never known such contentment existed, and he was drawn to it like a moth to flame. When the accusations against Sarah began, Caleb felt a rage he hadn't experienced in years. But this anger was different from the cold fury that had driven him in his gunslinging days. This was protective, fierce, and absolutely certain. He knew Sarah's character as surely as he knew his own name. The idea that these small-minded people would destroy something so pure and good filled him with purpose. Caleb began his own investigation. He talked to the railroad workers, who spoke of Sarah's kindness. He visited old Martha Jenkins, who cried when she described how Sarah had cared for her. He even found the spot where Tommy Peterson had fallen, examining the rocks and the creek, until he understood exactly what had happened. The truth was simple and innocent. Tommy had been playing near the water when the storm hit. The slippery rocks had caused him to fall and hit his head. Sarah had found him purely by chance during her evening walk, drawn by his cries for help. She had saved his life, not endangered it. But Caleb knew that truth alone wouldn't be enough to save Sarah. The town had invested too much in her guilt to accept innocence easily. They needed something more powerful than facts. They needed to be shaken from their comfortable certainty. So, on the day of Sarah's trial, when the courthouse was packed with people eager to see justice served, Caleb made his move. He had spent the morning in prayer, something he hadn't done since childhood. He asked for strength, for wisdom, and for the right words to save the woman he had come to love. When he walked into that courthouse and claimed Sarah as his wife, he wasn't lying. In his heart, she already belonged to him, and he to her. Their souls had recognized each other across the crowded spaces of their separate loneliness. He had chosen her, and now he was prepared to fight for her. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Caleb Rye was not a man you crossed lightly, and everyone knew it. But Reverend Thomas, perhaps drunk on his own power, decided to challenge the gunslinger. "This woman stands accused of harming a child," the Reverend declared. "If she is truly your wife, where have you been during her trial?" Caleb's voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the room. "I've been gathering the truth while you've been spreading lies." He then laid out the evidence he had collected. He described the exact location where Tommy had fallen, the way the rocks were positioned, and how the boy's injuries matched a simple accident. He spoke of Sarah's reputation among those who truly knew her, not those who had judged her from a distance. But most importantly, he confronted the Reverend and his wife directly. He had discovered that they had been stealing from the church collection, using their position to take money meant for charity. Their campaign against Sarah had been designed to distract from their own crimes, to give the town someone else to blame and punish. The evidence was overwhelming, and the town's certainty began to crumble. People started remembering Sarah's kindness, her quiet generosity, her gentle nature. They began to question how they had been so easily led astray. In the end, the truth won. Sarah was cleared of all charges, and the Reverend and his wife were exposed as the real criminals. But the victory felt hollow to many in the town, who realized they had nearly destroyed an innocent woman because of their own fears and prejudices. Sarah and Caleb left that town the same day. They rode together toward the horizon, two lonely souls who had found their home in each other. Behind them, the community was left to wrestle with the shame of what they had almost done. Their story became legend in those parts, told around campfires and in saloons across the frontier. It was a reminder that true love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's about seeing someone's worth when the rest of the world has turned blind. Sometimes it's about standing up when it would be easier to walk away. Sarah and Caleb found their new life together, built on understanding, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing you're not alone anymore. They proved that even in the hardest of times, hope and love can triumph over fear and hatred. What do you think about their story? Have you ever had to stand up for someone when it wasn't easy? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of courage, love, and redemption from the Old West.